The taste. 12 years ago, I was employed at the garment factory floor, and Shelley served as the personal assistant to the managing director. The common talk among the guys was her apparent youth for such a role, suggesting a special relationship with the boss. Shelley was undeniably attractive, with a style that emphasized her looks, often dressing in chic, form-fitting outfits that left little to the imagination. One day, as we watched her navigate the workspace in her high heels, a colleague commented on her confident stride, hinting at her active personal life in a rather crude manner. In our male-dominated workplace, the topic of Shelley's attire and personal life was frequently discussed, with crude guesses about her undergarments and speculative comments about her relationships. Despite my experience, I was hesitant around Shelley, admiring her from a distance. She navigated the daily workplace challenges with grace, often exchanging brief, meaningful glances with me, especially when the crowd thinned. A year into my tenure, an opportunity arose to speak with her alone. I awkwardly asked her out, to which she surprisingly agreed. I kept our relationship secret from my colleagues as long as I could, but once discovered, it led to relentless teasing and warnings about her supposed inconstancy. The gossip subsided but flared up again when Shelley and I announced our engagement. Before our wedding, my colleagues jokingly gifted me a symbolic chastity belt and shared exaggerated stories about marital infidelity. Later, in a private conversation, a known playboy in the office ominously advised me on the complexities of married life and the supposed ease with which married women could hide indiscretions. This all seemed like minor inconveniences to me. I was deeply in love and trusted completely, attributing any negativity to envy. The passion between Shelley and me didn't wane even after years of marriage. We were always close and affectionate. It baffled me why she was so drawn to me, as much as I was to her. In the workshop, things were calmer. My colleagues no longer made inappropriate comments about Shelley, though their gazes lingered. New employees occasionally made crude remarks upon seeing her, but they were quickly reprimanded by others, emphasizing that she was my wife. One newcomer apologized to me later, expressing astonishment that we were married. Shelley and I often went out, and she dressed boldly, which I enjoyed. It felt good to see others envy what we had. The first couple of years were blissful until Shelley became pregnant, somewhat unexpectedly. We had considered starting a family, but it happened sooner than we planned. Back at work, the crude jokes continued, but it was clear that the respect for our personal life prevailed. When Shelley had to be hospitalized for the birth, the concern was genuine, and despite a distasteful prank suggesting a paternity test, the support from my colleagues was overwhelming. They even gave me a humorous gift meant to lighten the mood, showing their camaraderie in their unique way. That evening, I found myself observing a pair of individuals on my screen, followed by another set the next night after visiting friends. There's a common sentiment that such explicit content is inappropriate, and perhaps they have a point, but for different reasons than often argued. Watching those scenes left me feeling disheartened. The exaggerated features of the actors were astonishing. Until then, I hadn't paid much attention to my own attributes. They served their purpose and had never been a source of complaint. However, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of inadequacy, especially when comparing to the exaggerated portrayals in the videos. My thoughts were oddly influenced the next day by a newspaper article about ducks. It mentioned that a certain species of duck had notably large features, causing a shift in mating dynamics. This led to reflections on whether size mattered in other species, including humans. A past conversation crept into my mind, raising doubts about past relationships and the importance of trust and fidelity. The world appeared full of infidelity stories, from personal experiences to community gossip, painting a bleak picture of loyalty. These musings made me reconsider my marriage. Instead of feeling reassured by the passion we shared, I grew suspicious. I wondered if the norm for other couples affected us, fearing my partner might seek excitement elsewhere. This marked the beginning of a troubled mindset. A sticker on my locker became a symbol of my growing distrust. My wife's regular business trips, which I once thought nothing of, now seemed suspicious. Driven by an overwhelming desire for clarity, I crossed a line by delving into her personal documents, hoping to uncover anything that could confirm my fears. Certainly, the note was in shorthand, which I struggled to understand, but I still attempted to extract whatever information I could. On 2 occasions, spaced a fortnight apart, I noticed Gary 2 p.m. followed by a cryptic mark. The mere mention of a male name struck me as peculiar, so I painstakingly combed through previous entries to gauge the duration of this meeting. Regularly, every month, the name surfaced on approximately the same dates, albeit not always accompanied by the same mark. I was just beginning to doubt the romantic nature of these meetings when I stumbled upon a January entry, Gary 2 p.m. Talbot Hotel. That's when I grasped the meaning of the cryptic marks. However, the nature of their meetings seemed unusual, prompting me to question her professional ethics. My suspicions grew, leading me to scour the diary for other anomalies. In the specified month, I found Ian Rowlandson next to a prominent asterisk. Despite a thorough search, his name appeared only once, yet each month featured a different name, marked with asterisks or brackets, hinting at fleeting encounters during supposed business trips. Overwhelmed, I took a moment to calm my nerves with a drink. Resuming my investigation, I aimed to correlate these secretive meetings with her business trips, ready to confront her with the proof. However, further examination revealed that the trips and the meetings didn't align, prompting me to reconsider the nature of the entries, eventually leading to a somewhat peaceful mindset. The next day, while visiting Sarah, I casually inquired, "Who is Gary?" Shelley initially feigned ignorance, then recalled Gary Fletcher, a salesman from Aztec, describing him as an unremarkable middle-aged man with glasses, a regular visitor at her office. This did not align with my observations of the sales team, making me feel quite foolish, and I chose not to discuss Ian Rowlandson further. Shelley's curiosity about my question led me to fabricate a reason, attributing it to her delirious mumblings before her hospitalization. Her laughter and quick assumption of an affair made me doubt her fidelity. As life normalized with Sarah and Shelley at home, my suspicions ebbed, comforted by the growing belief in my paternity. However, when Shelley shifted from her maternal focus and started enhancing her appearance, my old anxieties resurfaced. We relocated to a coastal town a good distance away, and there were sound reasons for the move. Our savings had dwindled without my wife's income. I had landed a much better-paying managerial role there, and the cost of living was significantly lower. Moreover, it seemed like a better environment to raise our daughter. My hidden agenda, though, was to avoid any chance encounters with my wife's past acquaintances or my colleagues dropping by unexpectedly during my work hours. We settled into a 2-bedroom house just a short walk from the beach. We quickly befriended our neighbor, who offered to look after our child. On our first night out in almost 2 years, I caught my wife looking past me with a focused gaze. "What are you looking at?" I inquired, with a hint of irritation. "I thought I saw someone I knew from Preston, but I was wrong," she replied. When I turned around, I didn't recognize anyone, though I did notice a tall young man nearby. The events that unfolded happened sporadically over the next 5 years, becoming more frequent towards the end. However, it wasn't all tense. We were mostly content, with the occasional disagreements sparked by my suspicions. I often opted for preventive measures over direct confrontation, spurred by unfounded suspicions. I canceled the window cleaning service, scheduled utility meter readings for Saturdays only, and handled the milk delivery payments by mail. I also attached a sign to our door that read "No salesman." I encouraged my wife to dress more conservatively. One evening, she dressed up, showing a bit of neckline, and I abruptly canceled our plans, expressing my discomfort with her outfit. Another time, I cautioned her about her appearance before going out, expressing my desire for her to dress more modestly. Shelley seemed at a loss. "What more can I do, Frank?" she asked. "I already dress more modestly than most, avoid high heels, and use minimal makeup. I'm not sure what else you want." "I want you to stop drawing attention," I retorted. "I think you unintentionally attract attention, and it bothers me. But I'm committed to you. I love you, and I wish you could see that," she responded gently. "Loving one person doesn't mean you can't have feelings for others," I replied. "But that's not who I am," she said softly. I often embarrassed my wife during our nights out with my moody behavior and groundless accusation. But one incident crossed the line. At a busy bar, a burly man carrying a beer brushed past Shelley, lightly touching her shoulder. This minor action triggered an irrational outburst from me. I aggressively confronted the man, causing a scene. Thankfully, Shelley quickly intervened, dismissing my behavior as drunkenness to defuse the situation, even though I wasn't drunk, just extremely agitated. That night marked the end of our social outings. Despite the frequent arguments fueled by my jealousy, our relationship remained physically passionate, intensifying after each dispute. The thought of Shelley with someone else constantly haunted me, filling me with a mix of anger and an inexplicable excitement. When our daughter Sarah began school, Shelley wanted to work part-time. I was overly cautious about her job choices, vetoing any role involving interaction with men or the public, fearing it would lead to unwelcome advances. Eventually, she secured a job at a hospice, which did not stop my baseless accusations. One day, I overreacted to a minor detail like an undone button on her blouse, convinced of her infidelity. My suspicion escalated when I found 2 used coffee mugs at home and a cigarette of an unfamiliar brand. Shelley explained the cigarette belonged to a neighbor, and the mugs could have been from earlier. However, blinded by jealousy, I twisted every explanation she offered. Shelley's preference for wine over coffee after work led to another groundless accusation when I found 2 used glasses at home. Her reasonable explanation did nothing to quell my unfounded suspicion, highlighting the extent of my irrational and destructive jealousy. The tension reached its peak one Saturday morning. Sarah was away at a friend's, so Shelley and I decided to go shopping in town. While I was in a shop, I came out to find Shelley talking to a tall, charismatic man. I impulsively accused her of flirting, ignoring her explanation that he was just asking for directions to the library. My mind raced with unfounded suspicions, escalating to the point where I imagined her unfaithful during my work hours. "Why do you insist on seeing me in such a negative light?" Shelley asked, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've never given you any reason to doubt me. I guess I've just been too naive," I replied, not realizing the irony of my words after years of unwarranted distrust. Frustrated, she attempted to gesture at me, which I countered with a regrettable slap that sent her stumbling against the wall. It was the first time I had ever struck her, and I immediately felt remorseful, tending to her and apologizing. Shelley spent the day resting on the couch while I tried to make up for my actions by cooking dinner. That night, we didn't share our usual intimacy. The following day was filled with cold silence, and she distanced herself from me that night. On Monday, Shelley informed me that she was keeping Sarah home from school, and by the evening, they had left. Her note read, "Sorry, Frank, I can't take it anymore. I need some space to think, so Sarah and I are staying with my mother. Please, don't follow us." I tried calling her mother's house, but to no avail. The next day, I sought counseling and help for my anger issues. After 3 days without contact, I called Shelley, who spoke to me briefly, expressing her weariness of my constant doubts despite her faithfulness. She asked for time and space. I proposed a weekly call, primarily to talk to Sarah, which she hesitantly accepted. Gradually, our conversations became more frequent and warm, and after 6 weeks, there was a noticeable change in our interaction. During one call, after a long silence, Shelley confessed her enduring love before quickly ending the call. About an hour later, the phone rang again. I expected it to be Shelley, but instead, a strange woman's voice came through. "Can I speak to Frank Miller?" she inquired, her voice smooth and captivating. "That's me," I responded. "Frank Miller from Bedford." My mind whirled with thoughts, suspecting this might be someone from the past trying to reconnect. Since my wife's abrupt departure, the house had been neglected. As the thought of possibly having a guest crossed my mind, I wondered how I could quickly spruce up, particularly the bedroom. "Yes, that's me," I replied, attempting charm. "Did you know your wife is seeing Mark Hyland?" She blurted out and then disconnected. The news struck me like a hammer. Mark Hyland, of all people, the privileged, handsome guy I remembered. He had everything handed to him, including a sports car that was the envy of many. Anger surged through me, yet there was a bitter vindication in the revelation. I immediately called Shelley. "Frank," she answered, expectantly. "You deceitful person," I snapped. "Frank, what's the issue?" She sounded genuinely shocked. "Deny your involvement with Mark Hyland," I demanded. Her hesitation confirmed the truth of the anonymous tip-off. "Don't you dare return here," I warned fiercely and ended the call. For 3 months, I cut off all communication, drowning in sorrow initially before pulling myself together and recommitting to self-improvement programs. It was a childlike letter starting with "Dear Daddy" that softened my resolve. I called that night and once more the following week, speaking only to my daughter, Sarah. But on the third call, Shelley spoke up after Sarah and I finished talking. "Frank, I need to tell you I'm filing for divorce," she stated calmly. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the official notice arrives." Silence hung between us. She continued, "I've cited unreasonable behavior. I thought you should know in advance, in case you want to respond legally regarding my actions." Still, I found no words. After a prolonged pause, Shelley whispered an apology and hung up. I informed my lawyer that I would not fight the divorce. I preferred to keep the reasons private, rather than publicize my spouse's infidelity. Opting to maintain my dignity, I paid what I believed was due for child support, setting up automatic deductions from my paycheck. My communication with my daughter remained consistent, marked by regular calls and the exchange of gifts and photos. Conversations with my soon-to-be ex-wife, Shelley, were strictly businesslike, primarily focusing on logistical details of the separation. Shelley informed me of her new contact details, having moved into a modest apartment with our daughter. She expressed no desire for financial claims against me or our shared assets, though she proposed the idea of contributing to a trust fund for our daughter should I feel inclined. That year, I lived a solitary life, going through the motions as my marriage dissolved. Any remaining hope faded as time passed. Initially, I could sense the pain in Shelley's voice during our calls, but it gradually turned into indifference. The divorce was proceeding amicably, allowing me flexible visitation with my daughter, including a significant portion of the summer holidays. With the divorce nearing finalization, I was granted immediate visitation to not miss out on the summer break. As the day of my daughter's arrival approached, I meticulously prepared my home. Anxiety had me repeatedly checking outside for their arrival. Eventually, a car appeared and slowly disappeared from view, which I instinctively knew carried my wife and daughter. Concealed by the doorway, I watched as Shelley and our daughter Sarah approached, each carrying luggage. When they were close enough, I emerged to greet them. Shelley stopped a short distance away, her expression unreadable as she looked at me. Sarah, however, quickly closed the distance between us, running into my embrace. After a heartfelt reunion, I offered to help with the luggage. Approaching Shelley, I saw the familiar blue of her eyes. I attempted to sound casual, inviting her in, but she declined, citing her awaiting ride, subtly nodding towards the car at the street's end. "Please, Mum, can't we go inside to talk?" Sarah's request made her mother relent, and she followed us into the house but stayed near the entrance. Her gaze drifted around the room, touching on familiar objects. "You've kept the place nice, Frank," she commented. "It hasn't been the same since you left," I responded with a hint of nostalgia. That was all we said before Shelley hurriedly embraced her daughter, urged her to behave, and left. My daughter's energetic demands for attention soon took over, though I caught a fleeting glimpse of a large car and its driver with distinctive glasses and graying hair as it drove by. Sarah spent the day reconnecting with her old toys. In the following days, I devoted myself to making up for lost time and past difficulties with Sarah. After a fun-filled day, Sarah came home exhausted and with a headache, likely from the roller coaster rides. When she felt unwell, I gave her medicine and put her to bed, but her condition quickly worsened. Frantically, I called for medical help, and she was rushed to the hospital with meningitis. Alone, I informed Shelley of the situation. Her response was prompt, "I'll come." I left the door unlocked and waited, lost in thought. When Shelley arrived, we shared a silent, prolonged embrace. Eventually, I mentioned that I had moved my things to Sarah's room to give her space. I insisted it was already done, ending the discussion. After preparing a simple meal, we headed to the hospital. Though we couldn't see Sarah immediately, a doctor gently explained her critical condition. We left late, drained, and spent the night separately at home, returning to the hospital early the next day. Our day was spent in anxious waiting, stepping out occasionally for a break. Finally, we saw Sarah, surrounded by medical equipment, through a glass partition. Over the next 3 days, our routine remained unchanged, though we were occasionally allowed brief moments by our daughter's side, holding her hand. The doctors only shared that she was stable, leaving us uncertain about potential long-term effects, such as cognitive or physical impairments. My partner and I spent our time reminiscing about our daughter's life, sharing cherished memories and unique traits that defined her. On the 4th day, a doctor, with a reassuring smile, announced her likely full recovery without impairments. When she opened her eyes and smiled, recognizing us, the relief was overwhelming. Silent with joy, we rode home in the taxi. Back home, emotions overflowed, and we embraced each other tightly, sharing a deep, affectionate kiss, momentarily losing ourselves in the reunion. However, the moment was cut short when my partner gently pushed me away, confessing to having met someone else. While taken aback, I understood, considering the emotional distance and challenges we faced during our daughter's illness. The conversation that followed, over coffee and biscuits, revolved solely around our daughter's health and recovery, avoiding the tension between us. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying our kiss and past intimacies. Restless and troubled by the emotional turmoil, I found myself outside my partner's room. I entered, the room dimly lit, and stood there, flooded with memories of our shared past and the intimacy we once had. She stirred, revealing a glimpse of invitation in the dim light. Without a thought, I crossed the room, and we came together in a moment of intense, desperate connection, a physical expression of our complex emotions, before exhaustion took over, leaving me with no clear memory of the moment ending. I woke up to Shelley gazing at me, propped on her elbow, her upper body unclothed. Her allure was mere inches from my face, compelling my hand to gently explore. A surge of connection sparked between us, leading to a passionate embrace. Unlike the previous night's tender moments, this encounter was driven by pure desire, marked by fervent expressions of passion. Our connection was intense and all-encompassing, exploring each other with renewed vigor and intimacy. Afterward, content and fulfilled, I remarked on the enduring chemistry between us. Shelley responded with a hint of sadness, acknowledging our compatibility in passion but pointing out the difficulties in other aspects of our life together. I remained silent, unable to defend against the truth in her words. Our silence lingered, comfortable yet heavy with unspoken thoughts, until Shelley broached the subject of Mark Highland. Reluctantly, I encouraged her to share. She recounted meeting Mark after a period of separation and how, influenced by her mother and a desire to defy my unjust accusations, she engaged with him despite her better judgment. Our occasional phone conversations during this time revealed a growing desire for reconciliation on both our parts, but my discovery of her actions with Mark put a definitive end to our relationship. Despite this, in the following days, we reconnected deeply, spending time both with our recuperating daughter and in each other's arms, seeking solace and understanding in physical closeness. As our daughter's condition improved, discussions about transferring her to a better-equipped hospital arose, leading to a moment of decision that hinted at the uncertain future of our relationship. Back at home over dinner, my wife noted how my therapy had improved me, mentioning that had I been this kind-hearted before, she might not have left. I overinterpreted her comment, buoyed by our strong connection. The next day, after spending a warm morning together, I broached the subject of reuniting as a family, spurred by a casual mention of Sarah. Shelley hesitated, then disclosed, "I'm sorry, Frank, I should have mentioned earlier. I'm getting married in 3 months." This revelation didn't completely surprise me. Though Shelley hadn't explicitly discussed someone else in her life, I sensed his presence. She regularly updated her mother on Sarah's well-being over the phone, yet I detected another, more discreet conversation she held nightly. Keeping my composure, I inquired, "What's he like?" "He's nice," she responded. I wouldn't expect less, I replied, forcing a chuckle to mask my indifference. His name is William, and he's 14 years my senior. And his profession? I asked, feeling awkward as if I were an old-time parent vetting a potential partner for my daughter. He's a lawyer, Shelley admitted, pausing with a hint of reluctance. Actually, he was the lawyer I consulted for the divorce. Things changed, so he passed my case to a colleague. Importantly, he adores Sarah and will treat her well. Curious, I bluntly inquired, and how is your relationship with him? It's different, no dramatics, but he's thoughtful and understanding, and that makes me happy, she explained. When did this relationship start? It began when I had to change lawyers. Initially, it was challenging, but he helped me get an apartment, which made the transition smoother without affecting the divorce proceedings. So, you're not seeking more from me because of his wealth, I surmised, feeling bitter. I'm marrying him because I love him, Shelley declared with pride. Unlike you, William doesn't doubt my actions. He trusts me completely. Despite my months of preparation, a sudden wave of anger overtook me. Betrayal, I exclaimed, snatching the duvet to reveal her deceit and my own stunned disbelief. If he has complete faith in you, what are you doing here? This is nothing, Frank, we're still married, Shelley replied, flustered. You were looking for solace, and frankly, so was I. That's all there is to it. Don't kid yourself, Shelley, I retorted. You relish the chaos you cause in my life, and this was your chance for one last adventure. You've said yourself there's no spark with him, but trust me, you're someone who craves excitement. If he can't provide that, plenty of others will. You won't tell Will about this, about us, will you? Her voice softened, her eyes wide as she clutched the sheet to her chin. Why should I? I responded coldly. Why let him off easily? Let him spend years as I did before he discovers the truth. Shelley, darling, I might have misjudged you before, but perhaps it was because I saw through you. At the hospital, Shelley opted for the air ambulance, and soon they were gone, leaving me to forward their belongings by train. Since then, whenever Shelley and her husband visit with Sarah, we engage in polite small talk. I remain distant towards him, but Sarah happily chats about her Uncle Will. I've started seeing someone new. She's quite attractive and, fortunately, we don't attract too much attention when out together. Beth enjoys intimacy, but it's balanced. My comment, Frank's an idiot, accusing his wife of cheating without any proof. Of course, this set the stage for her to actually cheat and find his replacement. Nobody to blame but himself. Should have kicked her out from the start instead of going through all of this. Story 2. I haven't done 2 stories in a video in a while, FWB. In a few weeks, I'll be celebrating my silver wedding anniversary, an event that brings to mind the early days of my friendship with Phil, who remains my best friend to this day. We met when we were about 12, quickly becoming allies in the playground, standing together against the tougher kids. Our bond grew as we navigated school and teenage life together, always side by side in class and sharing many after-school hours playing board games or hanging out. As teenagers, we explored the social scene together, both of us average in height and build, with a similar sense of style. Phil was the more outgoing, often initiating conversations, while I was better at keeping them going. This synergy served us well as we met new people and formed brief connections. Our nightlife adventures at 20 led us to meet Amy and Alice, 2 remarkable individuals who changed the usual dynamic. Phil's unexpected choice of Amy allowed me to get to know Alice better, which set the stage for deeper relationships than we had previously experienced. The 4 of us eventually decided to live together, which brought about a golden era of friendship and companionship. Our apartment was a hub of laughter, discussions, and shared experiences. We respected each other's space and privacy, ensuring that our communal life was harmonious and enjoyable. This phase of life, with its blend of friendship and evolving relationships, remains one of my most cherished memories, reflecting a time of happiness, discovery, and the strength of enduring bonds. Phil wrecked everything. I was content with our arrangement, never considering infidelity, but Phil couldn't resist temptation. His job put him in constant touch with women looking for excitement, and he brazenly shared his conquests with me, signaling each success with a knowing wink. Phil was discerning, though, claiming that if he succumbed to every opportunity, Amy would notice his diminished vitality. If only he had hidden his stash of condoms more effectively, this narrative might have unfolded differently. Amy discovered them, fueling her suspicions. Following him, she caught him red-handed, leading to her tearful departure. Alice remarked, "Amy is overreacting." With Phil, such behavior is to be expected. It's trivial to him. And if I were the one fooling around, you'd leave. Definitely, but that's because it would mean more with you, she explained. Her words made me realize the stark difference in perspective between Phil and me. The tension eased when Phil landed a job in Rhodesia. In a gesture of commitment, I proposed to Alice, and she agreed. We hurriedly planned our wedding, while Phil prepared for his move. He served as my best man, a role I couldn't imagine anyone else filling. His departure to Africa coincided with our honeymoon to Greece, where Alice's intense goodbye to Phil sparked a hint of jealousy in me. Initially, Phil wrote often, but his letters dwindled as he settled into his new life. The first 2 years with Alice were blissful until suspicion slowly infiltrated my thoughts. An unexpected inheritance allowed us to upgrade our lifestyle significantly. Socially active, I noticed how Alice attracted attention, especially from men, making me appreciate her allure. At social gatherings, she was the magnet for male company. In restaurants, she'd respond with a smile to distant admirers, which bothered me. Why respond to him? I'd ask. I'm just being polite. Maybe it made his day, she'd respond. But doesn't that invite unwanted attention? Some try, but I make it clear I'm happily married and uninterested. I had to come to terms with this thought. Given the right circumstances, she might respond differently. Memories of Phil's tales from his previous job plagued me. He claimed that many wives he met during his work were open to straying from their marriages. This led me to question the prevalence of unfaithfulness across different demographics. I dismissed Phil's stories as exaggeration and decided to delve into research on the matter. The most striking data I found was from a comprehensive, confidential survey of marital fidelity. It revealed that about 92% of women had been unfaithful at least once during their marriage, with 28% admitting to up to 6 instances, and 9% acknowledging more frequent affairs. In contrast, 62% of men had strayed at least once, 26% had multiple affairs up to 6 times, and 14% were much more unfaithful. These statistics suggested that while many women experimented once, men were more prone to repeated infidelity. Further exploration into the origins of human behavior suggested that early humans were quite promiscuous. However, the narrative that men aimed to spread their genes widely while women sought the best possible partner was contested. The book I read proposed that while men were generally satisfied with any available partner, women were instinctively looking to diversify their genetic contributions. This theory explained the need for women to engage with multiple partners from a biological standpoint. These insights resonated with me, fueling my suspicion that Alice might eventually become unfaithful. I spent many hours dwelling on this possibility, which left me in a state of emotional turmoil. The conclusion I reached was that if I could orchestrate a scenario where Alice was with another man of my choosing under controlled condition, it might mitigate the risk of her straying randomly. The challenge was finding the right person for this delicate situation. The man had to be unremarkable to avoid inciting further desires in Alice that I couldn't fulfill. Then, in a public restroom, I stumbled upon an advertisement offering to fulfill such scenarios, complete with contact details. Intrigued, I called the number. The man on the other end was more inquisitive than I anticipated, keen on details about Alice. His selectiveness and the subsequent boast about his attributes made me reconsider. I hesitated, suggesting I needed to discuss it with Alice, but I never followed up. The following month, a letter from Phil arrived, stating he had finished a 3-year contract and would be returning to England for 3 months. We immediately offered to host him during his vacation, and he called to accept. In the 2-week anticipation of his arrival, I contemplated how Phil might be the perfect answer to my predicament. Of all people, Phil was the one I felt most comfortable with Alice spending time with, especially since he would return to Africa for another 3 years after his break. One evening, after some drinks and quiet reflection, I asked Alice, "Did you ever have a liking for Phil when we all lived together?" "Yes, I did," she admitted. "And Amy liked you, she told me so. I would have enjoyed a more shared living situation, but I don't think that would have worked for Amy or you. What about Phil staying with us again? Do you think there will still be an attraction?" "I'm married to you now," she responded. "Besides, Phil is just using our place as a stopover. It's unlikely we'll see much of him." But when I spoke to Phil, he mentioned he's coming back mainly to visit us. He doesn't seem to have other plans, so he'll probably be around a lot. And, I mean, if you felt tempted, I'd understand. It wouldn't bother me as much as with someone else. "What are you implying?" she asked with a puzzled look. "Nothing, just that. He's a charming man, and it would be natural if you felt drawn to him while he's here. Do you want me to get closer to Phil?" I should have said yes to clear the air, but I hesitated, unsure of Alice's reaction. Instead, I replied, "No, that's not what I meant. You seem unsure of what you want. Let's go to sleep before we agree to something you might regret," Alice said, decisively heading upstairs. I felt somewhat content with the situation, convinced that Alice wasn't opposed to the idea of getting closer to Phil. If anything were to happen, it needed to be her choice. I didn't want her to feel compelled to please me. On a side note, you might wonder how I can recall these conversations so vividly after so many years. The reason is that each word is etched into my memory. We had arranged to pick up Phil at the airport, but he caught us off guard by arriving early and showing up at our home. The intensity of his greeting to Alice, marked by a heartfelt hug, was stronger than their farewell had been. After a moment, he pulled her close again, exclaiming, "I just have to hug you again. It's been too long since I last saw you." Seeing the warmth with which Alice responded to his hug, and noticing Phil's genuine happiness, I felt hopeful that things would unfold as I had envisioned without needing to steer them. Phil seemed well, his appearance spoke of success and maturity, yet the familiar bond among us remained intact. In the next few days, we mostly spent time catching up, especially hearing about Phil's various experiences while he was away. I gave them space, yet stayed observant, eager to catch any significant interaction, but nothing noteworthy occurred. Alice and I had 6 weeks of vacation from work, which we planned to split during Phil's stay. In the 2 months between, Phil would have time to explore independently, while spending evenings with us after work. I had hoped Phil would play a pivotal role in revitalizing Alice's spirits, so I was keen to initiate our plan. One Saturday morning, with Alice out for a hair appointment, I seized the moment to talk to Phil. I asked him outright if the old spark with Alice was still alive. He seemed cautious, but after some prodding, he admitted to still finding Alice attractive, noting she had grown more appealing over time. My face likely betrayed my pleasure at his confession. Phil, sensing there was more to my question, prompted me for the reason behind it. I explained that there would be times when I'd be at work and Alice would be his sole companion. Laughing heartily, Phil reassured me, emphasizing his respect for Alice and their friendship, reminding me of their deep-rooted bond and his role in our lives. This was not the conversation I had envisioned. "There's no reason for her to be off limits," I murmured under my breath. He gave me a look of disbelief, prompting me to quickly add, "I mean, if you felt it was necessary, I wouldn't object." "Wait, are you suggesting I should pursue your wife?" he asked. "Maybe I am," I replied. Phil took out his cigarettes, offered me one, and lit them both. "Dave, we've been friends too long to beat around the bush," he said thoughtfully. "If something's bothering you, just lay it out." I spilled everything. My wife's outgoing personality, the survey findings, and all my research. I was convinced that a single act of disloyalty would quell any thoughts of unfaithfulness in Alice's mind permanently. I concluded with, "So, it's almost like you'd be helping me out." Phil nodded, understanding. "I get your point," he acknowledged. "I really do. So, you'll consider it. The first chance I get to be alone with Alice, I'll see what happens. It must be subtle and relaxed. I don't want to be too forward and ruin the friendship." "You don't have to wait," I interjected eagerly. "I'll be called away to work for an emergency this afternoon and won't be back until late." Phil shook my hand. "I'll do my best," he promised. "Just 2 things," I added belatedly. "I don't want Alice to know we discussed this, and please keep me informed about how things go." Alice came home looking lovely, and we shared lunch. The 3 of us spent the afternoon chatting, with me feeling increasingly anxious. When the phone rang, I answered before the second ring. "Oh, are you sure you need me?" "Well, if it's urgent, I'll have to come in," I announced, making sure to sound concerned. Turning to them, I said, "There's been a mishap at work, and they need me. I might be back late." I hurriedly prepared for work, then paused at the door to glance back. "I regret having to leave you 2 alone. I'm sure you'll find something enjoyable to do," I said meaningfully. Only later did I realize how awkward my attempt had been. In the car, I didn't head to work but instead drove around and parked in a secluded lane. After walking through a wooded area, I reached a hilltop with a clear view of my home. From this lookout, I used binoculars to observe the living room and the bedrooms above it. My goal was to catch any subtle interactions or changes in behavior that might suggest something was amiss. I stationed myself there from mid-afternoon until late at night but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Although they moved around the house, they remained distant from each other, and there were times when I lost sight of them. I had to conceal myself occasionally from passers-by to avoid suspicion. As the hours passed, my initial excitement gave way to discomfort and frustration at my lack of preparation and the absence of any revealing activity. Navigating back through the woods in the dark was challenging, but I managed to return home around midnight. I found them sitting apart, and an unspoken communication with my friend confirmed that nothing had happened. Over the remaining days, while never directly confronting the situation, I remained vigilant for any signs of closeness between them. At the airport, before Alice's departure, my friend confirmed that nothing had occurred, reassuring me of Alice's fidelity. My suspicion eventually dissipated, especially after learning of Alice's pregnancy, which led me to adopt a more paternal role, putting aside my doubts and focusing on the upcoming family addition. Our son, born healthy despite a minor birthmark, became the center of our lives, and any concerns about past events faded away as we settled into family life. We had occasionally missed letters from Phil, which wasn't unusual when he was occupied. He began sending us videos showcasing his social life, sometimes with friends. The idea was to share moments, especially with Paul growing up. When a letter finally arrived, it revealed Phil had been unwell, battling a tropical infection that affected his hair, resulting in complete hair loss. The letter humorously warned us that the upcoming video would showcase his new look. Seeing Phil bald, without eyebrows and eyelashes, was startling yet amusing as he playfully faced the camera. The video, mostly set in a swimming pool, highlighted his bare appearance. One particular scene showed him from behind, about to dive into the water, when I noticed a distinct birthmark on his head. Catching my breath, I turned to Alice. "He's certainly making a splash," she remarked, unbothered. I was unaware. "I didn't realize you two had gotten so close. Isn't that what you suggested?" she replied. I couldn't argue. "How long? Was it during his entire visit?" "Essentially, yes, right from the beginning." "When did it start?" "From the afternoon you left us alone, claiming an urgent work call. It was as if you had arranged it," she explained. Their connection grew stronger in my absence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling a mix of emotions. Phil considered it, feeling he owed some honesty, but I disagreed, fearing it would change the dynamic. "Just imagine coming home to that reality," she concluded. I suddenly remembered something. "Is that why you were sometimes too tired or had a headache?" Alice seldom turned me down when I sought her attention. "Yes, usually, I managed to balance my time between Phil during the day and you at night, but sometimes things got out of hand, leaving me either exhausted or in discomfort, and I couldn't let you suspect why. You seemed to get involved with him very quickly," I remarked with a hint of bitterness. "It wasn't exactly a seduction. He and I had been together before." "Before, when?" My mind was spinning with each new revelation. "Back when we all lived together. You were giving Amy driving lessons. That's when Phil and I connected. It dawned on me then that I might end up marrying you, and I needed to be sure I wasn't making a mistake from the day we first met." "I assumed Phil chose Amy," I said. "Don't be naive," she replied. "So, it took you 3 times with him to conclude I was the better choice?" "No, I knew after the first time, but I enjoyed it and thought, why not, while the opportunity was there. Honestly, we didn't believe those were just driving lessons Amy was getting from you. Yet, you chose to stay with me. Clearly, Phil had his charms, but you were the better choice for a husband and father." "Father? That's quite ironic given what I've just learned. Just because it was his biological contribution doesn't define him as the father. Phil could never fulfill that role like you. He might be a great uncle, though. Be honest, does knowing this diminish how you feel about our son?" The truth was, this revelation didn't change my feelings. Paul was still my child. Should we tell Phil? Somehow, her response mattered more to me than the intricacies of biological ties. "I don't see the need," Alice replied. "It would just embarrass him." Just over a week later, Alice took me to the shops to buy a new bed. It was a massive king size, dwarfing our old double bed. I found it excessive, but Alice was enamored with it. The next letter from Phil mentioned his upcoming 3-month leave of absence and his wish to stay with us again while in England. The video he sent showed his hair returning to normal. In the weeks before Phil's arrival, Alice and I avoided the topic, but I sensed that their intimate relationship would resume. Part of me was oddly at ease with this, considering the routine that had set in with our family life. Unbeknownst to me, Alice had plans for the king-size bed. Upon Phil's arrival, she cheerfully suggested that all 3 of us share it. That night, the transition was seamless. Alice went to bed first, and Phil and I followed after a brief pause. Alice was already in bed, positioned in the center. I joined her without a word, settling into my usual side. Phil took his time before joining us, and Alice turned to face him. Despite the oddity of the situation, I joined in, engaging with Alice playfully. Reflecting on it, I wasn't as shocked as I thought I'd be, likely because of their history and my past experiences. Initially, Phil received more attention, which felt unfair at times. We interacted with Alice in a coordinated manner, yet only one of us engaged with her at a time, with Phil often going first. Occasionally, Alice would ask me to refrain, citing tiredness, only for them to continue later in the night. There was an instance where all 3 of us were involved at the same time. I woke up close to Alice, engaging affectionately with her. While it seemed mutual, I discovered Phil was also intimately connected with her, adding a complex layer to our interaction. Talking about personal preferences with Alice years later, she mentioned that Phil had a fondness for a different kind of intimacy. I usually enjoyed this variation occasionally, as part of a more adventurous encounter, whereas Phil seemed to prefer it as a regular preference. His method was also distinct. He chose to be beside her rather than the more common position I favored. Shockingly, soon after my friend returned to Africa, Alice discovered she was pregnant again. Throughout the pregnancy, we both harbored the same significant concern, so it was a huge relief when the baby boy arrived without any unusual traits. Despite this, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Alice's history of unexpected pregnancies wasn't surprising given her lax approach to contraception, often having leftovers at the end of the month. Yet, it seemed odd that I hadn't fathered a child with her despite our long history, whereas Phil seemed to have succeeded twice under limited circumstances. A discreet test confirmed my suspicions. I had a significantly low sperm count, making Phil the likely father of both children. I felt compelled to share this discovery with Alice, who pragmatically accepted the situation, highlighting the blessing of having 2 wonderful sons, akin to others who rely on sperm donation to become parents. Strangely enough, Alice and I rarely spoke of Phil's intimate connection with her, except when his return was imminent. Our life proceeded as usual, raising our family, and any news from Africa felt like updates from a distant friend. Phil's next visit was sooner than expected, after 2 years instead of 3. Disenchanted with Zimbabwe's political climate, he had moved to South Africa, seeking stability despite its challenges. He outlined his new 2-year work cycle with shorter breaks. As his arrival approached, I found myself as anticipative as Alice, not just for the personal connection but also cherishing the engaging conversations we shared. However, the surprise came when Alice suggested changing our sleeping arrangements to accommodate Phil's stay, reasoning it would be more comfortable for the short 6-week period, unlike the previous 3 months. Confounded, I expressed my concern about the long separation, to which she reminded me of the longer durations we'd managed during her pregnancies. She reassured me, recalling how we had navigated those times together. Alice assured me with a smile, "I'm sure I can help you again," and seemed to consider the issue resolved. However, her promise left me feeling unresolved. "Please, make sure you manage things responsibly. I don't want to deal with any unexpected surprises," I said with frustration. Alice was taken aback by the harshness of my words. "You don't really mean that," she remarked. In truth, I regretted my words immediately. "Ignore what I just said," I urged her. "It's just that his presence makes me feel less important." She comforted me with a gentle kiss, sat beside me, and whispered, "You have to stop thinking that way. You're not second to anyone, you are the best. In my eyes, you are the world's best husband, and I love you, not him. Let me explain. My interactions with him might be thrilling, but they don't fulfill me. With you, it's different. Our connection satisfies me deeply, leaving me content in a way he never could. With him, it's about seeking excitement in the moment, but with you, it's about a meaningful connection that lasts." Feeling somewhat appeased, I resigned myself to a less central role in the household. Yet, there were benefits, like when Alice would seek me out for intimate moments, especially when he was not around. These encounters, albeit brief, had a unique thrill to them due to our complex situation. I must admit, I found some guilty pleasure in secretly watching them. I spied on them from a distance, equipped with binoculars, getting a clear view into their private moments. This act of watching, though questionable, was strangely compelling. When he visited again 2 years later, I felt more prepared. Anticipating the repeat of past events, I set up a TV in another room to distract myself. I also upgraded to a better video camera, discreetly positioning it to capture their encounters. This setup allowed me to watch from a distance, a guilty pleasure that I indulged in throughout his stay. Reflecting on my actions later, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of guilt, questioning the morality of my voyeuristic tendencies. When the next scheduled visit was drawing near, I felt overwhelmed by guilt and realized I couldn't subject myself to the same situation again. There was also the matter of appearances. I expressed to Alice that it wasn't suitable for me to stay in the guest room anymore, as the children were old enough to notice something was off. Alice acknowledged this and mentioned that she and Phil were planning a 2-week vacation in Cyprus to maintain appearances. They aimed to keep their trips discreet, ensuring that regular family life remained uninterrupted. This arrangement continued, with their getaways to Cyprus or a Greek island happening periodically. The children became accustomed to their mother's trips with Uncle Phil, accepting it as a normal part of life. Initially, I spent a lot of time pondering over Alice and Phil's escapades, imagining them strolling along the beach rather than focusing on their intimate moments. Over time, I began to think of it as just another family holiday. However, the agreement we had was often disregarded. Even though I kept the marital bed, their intimacy wasn't limited to their vacations. When the children were preoccupied, it wasn't unusual to see them overly affectionate with each other in the living room. And during weekends, they'd openly retreat for some private time, leaving me to look after the kids. Alice often spent nights away from our bed but returned by morning. In my late 30s, a troubling incident occurred during one of Phil's visits. Alice and he attended a party that unexpectedly turned into an affair involving partner exchanges, and Alice participated willingly. When I protested, she firmly stated her autonomy in such decisions. She tried to downplay the event, but it was clear they continued to partake in similar gatherings. I was also hurt by Alice's admission that she preferred Phil's physical intimacy over mine, a preference she expressed openly and acted upon. This aspect of our relationship became a painful reminder of the disparity between my connection with Alice and hers with Phil. In any long-term relationship, the initial excitement tends to fade, leading to a routine life where both partners strive to avoid discomfort, often settling for less fulfilling experiences. However, whenever Phil visited, the dynamic between him and Alice was rejuvenated, highlighting the growing disparity between my presence and his. As Phil's visits approached, Alice seemed to become younger and more vibrant, whereas I felt increasingly mundane and unnoticed, contrasting sharply with Phil's energetic and attractive demeanor. One day, my wife complimented my insight from the beginning of our relationship. She confessed that she found nothing wrong with being close to someone she liked and thought it unreasonable for partners to feel affected by such actions. She admitted her attraction to other men and said that if not for Phil's entrance into our lives, she might have had numerous romantic entanglements. With a kiss, she praised my understanding and assured me that, aside from one significant person from her past, there were no others. I mentioned our past experiences with couple exchanges, but she dismissed them as trivial. Surprisingly, Phil and I have never discussed his relationship with Alice. Officially, he's still helping me out as initially agreed, but I've come to see that he's mainly looking out for his own interest, and wouldn't stop his involvement with Alice even if I objected. The thought of being rejected in such a matter was too much to bear, so I never seriously considered confronting it. Alice was right in predicting that Phil would be the perfect fun uncle. In their younger years, he was a figure of adventure to my sons, embodying roles like a big game hunter and treasure seeker. As they grew up, they looked up to him for his charm and ability to attract people, maintaining a youthful and adventurous image despite his age. I hope that as we all got older, Phil's interest in Alice might wane. However, Alice still looks remarkably youthful, while I've aged more noticeably. Phil, affected by his adventures under the sun, still manages to maintain a youthful appeal. His recent visit showed he's still as captivated by Alice as ever. You might wonder if I ever sought companionship elsewhere, either for revenge or from natural desires. The answer is no. I've only ever wanted Alice, and besides, I've never been good at initiating romantic conversations, nor have I had many opportunities to be alone with another woman to try. I now wish those experiences with couple exchanges had never happened. Based on Phil's comments and the attention Alice received, it seems she was involved with many, which she claims was inconsequential. Yet, I can't help but wonder if, had I not intervened and allowed things to unfold naturally, the extent of her infidelities might have been less. Paul and Stuart have moved out, with Stuart beginning university and Paul on the verge of completing his degree. Both are brighter than myself, a trait likely inherited from their mother. As I reflect on the upcoming anniversary of my marriage, I find myself weighing the dynamics of our unconventional arrangement, trying to discern who has benefited the most. Phil has undoubtedly thrived, leading an enviable life surrounded by many impressive companions, and always having Alice, who eagerly awaits his return. Alice, too, has her share of contentment, experiencing a fulfilling marriage complemented by the excitement of Phil's intermittent visits. As for me, I wouldn't consider myself at a loss, as the advantages I've gained are substantial, and the drawbacks, negligible. I cherish the joy and pride of fathering 2 sons, an opportunity I wouldn't have had otherwise. My marriage has been happy and stable, enriched by a loyal wife, with a slight concession. In comparison to my peers, the sporadic inclusion of Phil in our lives has, in a way, invigorated my own romantic experiences. Oddly enough, I sometimes find unconventional satisfaction in knowing about Alice's encounters with Phil. Moreover, my relationship with Phil has grown into a meaningful friendship, which might have dwindled had Alice not been a reason for him to stay connected. However, I sense a potential loss looming. In his recent communication, Phil mentioned that he plans to make this visit his last, as he intends to leave Africa and settle in England permanently. My comment: he finds out his friend lied about it and that they used to sleep together back years ago and hid it. That should have been enough for the divorce. What do you guys think of this ending? Do you think Phil is going to end up alright? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will see you in the next one.